I'm Narbe Alexandrian, President and CEO of Canopy Rivers, and you're listening to Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night?
Hello, listener, and welcome back to the Professionally Cannabis Podcast. I'm Johnny Weiser, and with me is the host with the most, it's Oscar Houseman. Hey, Oscar, how's it going?
Hello, Johnny, and hello, listeners. Welcome to another wonderful episode, and this one is one I'm sure you'll enjoy. Johnny, tell them why.
Well, this week we interviewed Narbe Alexandrian. For those of you that don't know him, he's the president and CEO of Canopy Rivers. Now, they're one of the best-known investment vehicles in the space with a really diversified portfolio across the value chain. Oscar, tell me a little bit more about their portfolio.
Well, we're going to have one of their portfolio companies, High Beauty, headed up by Melissa Yoakum, on in another episode, but this one is the parent company, although I kind of like the idea of doing investors and their portfolio companies. It gives us a sort of homely mum and pa feel. Don't you agree? Anyway, let's get on with the show.
Where do they go, the smoke
It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the show Narbe Alexandrian, president and CEO of Canopy Rivers, one of the leading cannabis VC investment firms in the world. With a diversified portfolio that spans across the cannabis value chain and listed aptly on the TSX as weed, I'd imagine there's probably a handful of business owners who'd be keen to collaborate with you guys. Sound about right, Narbe?
That's true.
So, thank you for joining us on Professionally Cannabis, Narbe. A question we like to ask all our guests, just to find out how they sit on this, is what led you to the plant?
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me on the show. We're really happy to talk to you guys today. What really led me to the plant was a haphazard recreational use back when I was in my teens. Hopefully my mother doesn't listen to this podcast, but if she does, secrets are coming out. And so got my first feel of the plant there, and just really fell in love with the creativity and the surge of thought that came to my mind, and I've been a happy user of it for quite some time.
That's really interesting because we get a lot of people on Professionally Cannabis who are drawn to it with stories that originate in medicine, but few, especially leaders in your position, are able to look at perhaps the more mind-expanding or creative sides of cannabis. I suppose because you're in a recreational market, that's easier to say. Have you always been able to have that conversation? No,
definitely not. I mean, the stigma still exists even today. There's still some type of pushback on saying that you're a consumer of the product, even though the product is fully legal and you can consume it at home, you can consume it on the street, you can do anything you want in Canada with it, both recreationally and medically. So I try to, I'm telling you the truth in a sense, but I would really challenge many other CEOs out there as well to openly talk about how they use the product as well on a recreational use as well as for wellness as well.
Ace. And for folks that might not be so familiar with Canopy Rivers, could you give us a bit of an overview about the company culture, and the type of organizations that you like to work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So it might make sense to go a bit back into the history of how Canopy Rivers was created. And I won't bore you with too much detail, but I'll give you a bit of a 2-minute rundown that really explains why we exist today. So Canopy Rivers, as you know, we're a premier venture capital vehicle. Our largest investor is Canopy Growth, hence our name. The Canopy Growth, what first thought and created of Canopy Rivers back in April of 2017. At the time, Canopy Growth looked a lot different. They had $100 million of cash, $1.5 billion of market. And the principals there were looking to make investments within the space to actually buy companies. So at the point in time, legalization was expected to be July 1st, 2018. Ended up getting pushed to October 17th, 2018. And as they were approaching legalization in Canada, they were looking to buy companies. And some of the owners of these companies were open to being acquired. Other owners wanted to ride the wave of legalization and weren't ready to sell it just yet. So the thought process there was, why not own the gas station on both sides of the street and control traffic that goes into that street corner, and buy companies as well as invest in strong operators, strong business models, strong business plans. You have to really think long term to really understand that, because if this is indeed going to be a $500 billion industry someday, there's going to be multiple winners, multiple business models that really succeed, and no government that's looking to legalize for either recreational or medicinal only is going to look to give a competitive advantage or a monopoly to a single company, but instead is going to want to spread that apart. So the thought of having multiple shots on net, buying companies on the Canopy Growth side, investing in a minority stake on the Canopy Rivers side really just made sense, and it's been working very well for us ever since. Our culture is fantastic, both internally and externally. Internally, we have 16 employees here that are focused on understanding what the next wave of disruption is within the space. So we have a very strong process here of diving deep into companies that are in the space. So we have, over the last 365 days ended June 30th, we saw 1,523 pitches across the world. So it's a mind-boggling number of conversations, but through that process, we've collected a lot of data, as well as we really understand how things are moving within the industry today, which has given us quite a domain expertise in the space.
And so how does that relationship with Canopy Rivers and Canopy Growth look like now? Is there, I don't know, team away days between the two organizations? Do you share any office or communications, or is it sort of like a Chinese wall or even a physical wall? Are you quite physically separated?
We have our own office. We are autonomous and independent from Canopy Growth, and it was done like that on purpose because of the fact that if we were investing in a company, you wouldn't want only one possible acquirer of that company. Instead, you want to keep it open so that these companies can thrive and speak to other companies within the space. So it was purposely done so it was an autonomous vehicle. We do have a very strong relationship with Canopy Growth. We speak to them all the time, probably every day, I'd say. And we pass deals on to them for full acquisition. They pass deals on to us for minority investments. So it's been a very strong relationship there. Constellation, same thing as well. We speak to them all the time. We think they're doing a great job, and we have a very strong relationship with them. And we speak to them probably every couple of days, I'd say. So it's a very collaborative environment between the companies.
One of the things you touched upon before is that sort of way over 1,000 pitch decks have sort of come through Canopy Rivers. At what point in the process do these decks sort of make their way to your own personal desk? And how many of them do you think sort of make it up their ladder far enough for you to give your own 2 cents on potential acquisitions, potential investments?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Just to clarify, we've seen over 1,500 pitches, not necessarily just the decks. So these are conversations that we've had. If you count the number of decks of companies that we didn't end up speaking to, but we received the deck, we would probably be over 2,000 companies in total. So I'm very deeply involved in the deal team here. Originally, when I first joined Canopy Rivers, I led the deal team, and then slowly as Bruce was moving his role and focusing more on Canopy Growth, I took over the presidency role and then the CEO and president role. But I still keep my cadence of discussions on startups and pitches and to hear how things are going. I always believe that the best way to understand how this industry is progressing isn't by reading a secondary report made by someone smart that says this industry is going to become $100 billion in 5 years, but instead it's just about just rolling up the sleeves and talking to entrepreneurs and operators within the space who are specializing in doing something, whether it be plant science or biosynthetics or cultivation or extraction or consumer packaged goods, so brands. It's really just about seeing how they see the entire landscape, what they see as competitive forces, what they see as regulatory pressures. And that's the best way to really learn how this industry moves is by taking the time and speaking to these entrepreneurs.
And so it sounds like you get a real sense of where the industry's headed from these pitch decks. I suppose you're able to, in a way, play the role of Cassandra and see ahead. Are there any trends that you've seen coming on recently that are perhaps a bit more novel than the ones our audience might be familiar with? I'm sure they've heard about biosynthetics and people seeking GMP certification and the like, and beverages. What's the next wave of entrepreneurs looking at, the ones that the public haven't heard about yet?
Yeah, so we like to think that the industry in general, for many geographies, with the exception of Israel, because they go medical first, go within 5 distinct waves. So the first wave is cultivation. Generally, if you're in a brand new geography and you have one of the first licenses, you have a first mover advantage. It takes about 18 to 24 months to build and fully license and fully build out a cultivation facility. So if you're one of the first licenses, you have a head start. Over time, when you're the 200th and 250th license that's in there, the value of that next license isn't quite there. So the next wave after that is the ancillary industry, which is the picks and shovels of the cannabis industry, whether that be extractors or plant formulations of products or emulsification technologies or technology and media. The ancillary industry is what makes the dry flower and puts it into the hands of the end consumer. The third wave is consumer packaged goods. We believe right now we're at the beginning of this huge wave where we have yet to see a global Coke or Pepsi type brand, nor have we seen a brand that captures both the shelves market share as well as mind share of the end consumer. So right now we're consistently trying to look through data and chase what we believe are the next Corona and Guinnesses of the cannabis world. The fourth wave is medical. I think this is going to be the biggest one just because anecdotally we see such strong evidence of cannabis helping from everything from epilepsy to weight loss, weight gain, cancer treatment, all the way down to pet foods as well. And then the fifth wave is maturation, where we like to highlight it as being the inability for a small company to end up on any shelf of a cannabis retailer because the large players really push incentives to push out some of the small players. So that's kind of how we generally see things going. One of the areas where people don't really look at and that are it's pretty novel is probably on the plant science side. So while we do a lot of work in biosynthetics and brands and international expansion, et cetera, I think what people miss out on is that we don't really know much about the plant. We don't know what other cannabinoids are really coming out of the plant. Generally, we've had a hard time in stabilizing the genetics for many of the breeds and strains that are out there. We haven't done that much homework on making the plant more resilient to pests and mold and increasing the oil production so we don't waste much of the plant on biomass and in bio waste. So we've done a couple of investments in that space with Biolumic and Zcal. Both were co-invested by one of the venture funds of Bayer Crop Science and another one by the venture fund of Corteva, which is Dow DuPont Pioneer. And this is to truly understand how we can make this plant better. Anecdotally, I always like to use the example of strawberries. I don't know if you know this or not, but 60 years ago, you could only buy strawberries in June. Harvest was in May. It was once a year, and it hit the stores in June. And once it was done, you couldn't get strawberries again for a full year. Over time, breeders of these genetics found that there were certain strains of strawberries where you could actually breed them to be year-round cultivation. And now we're at a point where no matter what industrial country you go to, you can pick up strawberries, whether it's in January or in June or in September of the year. That same type of concept is being applied to the cannabis space to really understand how to take advantage of the crop and how to own the technologies that really differentiate and create a barrier to entry for cultivators out there.
And with regards to the firms that you do invest in, what would you say is the average deal size, or if that's a little bit too variable between the companies, what would you say is a sort of average stake that Canopy Rivers look to gain when they're investing in a cannabis business?
Yeah, so we've been life cycle investors just through all the domain expertise that we have. Sometimes we see deals earlier on that we think are going to become very profitable down the road. So we do seed stage investments, and other times we do larger check sizes. So our check sizes have ranged anywhere from $1 million to $50 million in a single deal. So it's a wide variety of areas. We like to say that we're life cycle investors from that standpoint. When we look at the average check size, I'd say it's anywhere between $5 to $15 million. So let's average that out to $10 million for a stake of typically 20% of the company.
And once invested, what type of non-financial stake do you like to have in the management and operations of the business, sort of on the ground?
Yeah, so we typically like to get a board seat, and we have a board seat in many of the portfolio companies that we have, but it's not a must on our end. So we're really open to working with the entrepreneur to see if we can actually add a lot of value to the company through the board, or are we better off as being more passive investors and taking a deep dive on operations through another mechanism. So the other mechanism is our impact team. So we have a team of 4 individuals that come from a wide variety of areas. So it's led by our COO, Olivier Duformontel, ex-McKinsey, ex-Harvard MBA. He was the chief operating officer of Canopy Growth for about 5 years, built about 6 million square feet of facility for Canopy Growth, came over to Canopy Rivers, did another almost close to 2 million square feet of facility. So that's the equivalent of, call it 130 soccer or football fields. And so it's a large, huge space of cultivation that he's drawn out and mapped. So he has a team. We have an individual that focuses on operations of the company, an individual that has a legal background, comes from some large LPs and is focused solely on regulations. And this team goes in as a scrum team into all of our portfolio companies and finds ways to make them better. So we like to call it somewhat of a pro bono consulting shop. So whether it be on the cultivation side of trying to find buyers of the product or brands that they should license in, or maybe it's on the technology angle like LeafLink that's trying to create a e-commerce platform for business-to-business wholesale selling. It's about just making the technology better and finding customers. This team is operational at heart, entrepreneurial at heart as well. And all of our portfolio companies love the impact that it's leaving on them.
So let's talk about your portfolio companies a little bit more. If I was a general with a map of the world in front of me, are all your counters stacked in North America?
No, actually not. So we have 18 companies. Half of them are in Canada. The other half are split between the US, New Zealand, and Italy. So we have a continual focus on companies outside of Canada. We believe the Canadian market has a number of very strong players, and just until we see how these players pan out with Cannabis 2.0, which are beverages and edibles and vapes, we were holding back on making some large investments in this geography. The focus has been on the last little while in the U.S. with how the U.S. is trending towards federal legalization for medical as well as recreational as well. But I've always believed at heart, and just looking through all the data sets, that Europe is the dark horse that not many people are investing large dollars into. Here you have a continent that you have low-cost labor in some areas with favorable agriculture that you can create and cultivate cannabis for cheap. And then you have other areas such as the UK and France and Germany where you have large discretionary spend as well as consumption is high and you can sell product there. So it's a perfect storm just brewing. So we're very deep on Europe. And then we have a focal point as well currently on India and China as some of the large scale hemp production facilities that are going to convert into CBD are coming onto the field.
Very interesting. So I'd like to hold the thought on Asia for a moment, because you actually preempted my next question, which is how does Canopy Rivers think about Europe? So well done for getting there before I could even form it. But taking your Italian company, which I believe is called Canopy, as perhaps the starting point of this story, what do you think is going to go on for our listeners here in Europe and I suppose ourselves here?
Yeah, so when if we take the most mature European market out there right now, which is Germany, which relative to North America is not mature at all, but let's take it as a conversation point for now. Germany has legalized on the medical side. Germany is about to legalize soon enough, I would say within the 18 months on the recreational side. Here you have a large population. You're seeing double-digit growth rates in terms of medical patients in the country every single month. So things are panning very fast. You only have 3 licenses that are given out, one to an Afria, one to Aurora, and one to Demican. And these 3 domestic producers can't handle the amount of demand that's coming online on the medicinal side, let alone if they open it up recreationally. So at this point in time, Germany's taking a lot of imports in from Canada. Legalized market, EU GMP facilities here. So it's very easy to push the product into that market. Just talking to many of these nations and some of the governments behind the programs that are considering legalization, many of them, one of the big focal points for them is creating jobs. Another focal point is creating tax revenues. And we just don't see that in the long term that imports and exports will really work out for Europe. We believe that domestic cultivation will take shape, whether that is every country vertically integrating domestic cultivation there, or it's a matter of growing in somewhere like Greece, extracting in our facility in Italy, and then pushing it out into pharmaceutical companies in Germany and Switzerland, etc. The way that's going to measure up is going to be quite unique because of the European Union and how everything is tied together. But we do believe we're very bullish on what we're seeing there.
And how are you guys viewing Brexit and what that can mean for future investment opportunities and sort of broader opportunities to engage with the UK?
I think Brexit adds a bit of a challenge to it because instead of just looking at it from what is Europe doing, now you have to look at it as what is the UK doing and what is Europe doing. Through our discussions with some of the leaders in the UK and asking them about how they're looking at legalization of cannabis, it seems like it's on the table, and it seems like it's moving pretty fast as well. Just seeing how quickly the discussion went from we're not going to touch cannabis at all to we're thinking of legalizing medicinal. And when we ask them how long that's going to take and why doesn't this move faster, the quick response there is they have bigger things to worry about, which is Brexit and how that's going to take place. And once that's figured out, whether or not it does happen, then the talks about cannabis and legalizing it for medicinal use will start to ramp up again.
So I guess moving on to taking it down a different tack. Now, if Oscar and I were to walk into your office, in this situation, we're pitching you directly, but Oscar and I, we've walked into your office, we're just starting our pitch. What could we say that would really pique your interest and sort of create a yearning for you to hear more from us within the first couple of minutes of the conversation? And conversely, what type of things could we say or do in our opening that really, for you, would sort of
turn
put
you
the
off?
Conversation dead? Yeah.
Yeah, so we live and breathe the cannabis space every single day, every weekend. It's a nonstop industry in terms of how fast it's growing. So you have to really keep abreast of everything that's taking place. So usually when entrepreneurs do come in, it's a half-hour pitch. They do spend about 10 minutes talking about how big this industry is going to get and what the market size looks like.
As if you guys don't know.
As if we haven't seen it 100 million times, as if we don't know, as if we don't have our own views on it. So don't waste your time on saying how big the opportunity is because we believe it, we breathe it, we live it. And if we didn't, then we wouldn't be here today. Talk more about what you see in the market. So I always like to say that companies, when they're pitching to us, they're so focused on their company, but they're not focused on creating the relationship with a venture capitalist. So find a way to teach the venture capitalist about what you're doing. So recently I was on a pitch and I was talking to someone that was building a cultivation or a facility in Malta. And they were talking about some of the regulatory arbitrage that's taking place there. And it was less so on what am I building? It was more so on look how much I know about this geography and how I'm going to make you smarter through this pitch. And I have way more of that to come if you want to invest in the company. I live and breathe the regulations. I know it very well. Let me teach you something along the way. If it's not a deal for us, it's still a company that we like to keep track of because of the way they've presented themselves and the way they're pitching to us. So I'd always like to say that go in and work on educating your other counterparty on your thesis behind why you're doing what you're doing. A lot of times we see companies coming in and saying that I'm creating a hemp cultivator in the US. And the reason is why. And we ask why. And then their answer is, well, everyone else is doing it and making a lot of money off of it. Like to us, that's not a business that you want to build. That's an opportunist that wants to take advantage of the capital markets or the public markets to make a quick buck off of it. It's not something that we're really comfortable with. Another point I'd say are companies that come in and they have a very deep understanding about both their competitors, but more specifically about their customer. So they've done so much customer analysis. They've gathered all the secondary data, but also have done surveys, which you can do for pretty cheap on using Google tools to understand what is it that consumers want. Is it a CBD product that's 10-to-1 ratio or 9-to-1 ratio? Is it a flavor of blueberry? Is it flavorless? Is it a tincture? Is it a topical? What are they using it for? They're really deep customer analytics, whether it's in their space or in an adjacent space, really helps us understand that the team is focused on solving a pain point rather than producing yet another homogeneous product in the market. And that goes a long way. And truly, those companies that we've seen that do that, majority of them are coming out of California.
California does seem to have the best consumer-focused product development in this space anywhere in the world. You don't really see that level of innovation coming from outside of it.
Absolutely. I think it's because of the competition. It's a huge landmass. It's a huge population in a small landmass, and everyone's fighting for piece of market share in any given segment outside of cannabis too. So they just learn how to be creative. They learn how to be innovative. They learn how to stand out from anybody else.
And how do you feel about how that market is for consumers and patients versus, say, the Canadian market? I'm thinking here specifically that, say, for instance, in California, to stand out from the herd, you have to have big billboards, your packaging's beautiful, the product looks and feels great. Whereas in Canada, I don't think you've got those tools available to your marketing teams.
No, you don't. So you can't actually speak directly to the consumer. But regardless if you're in California or if you're in Canada, I think one of the things that many companies are missing is that they're so focused on becoming the Coke and Pepsis of the world, where you have mass distribution and you're looking at developing everything for everyone, that you miss out on the niches that exist in the cannabis space. So you have athletes that want product for performance enhancement or recovery. You have soccer moms that want the product for a replacement to the glass of wine that they're drinking at night. You have the elderly demographic that are focused on arthritis pain and ways to relieve the pain through topicals. But the products that you're seeing are created so in such a homogeneous way where they're not really speaking to that consumer. So I like to go and always talk about how this industry needs more niches. You need to create products for specific demographics and just focus the heck out of that demographic and really build that segment out. And we're not seeing enough of that. We're seeing a lot of companies just building product for the sake of building product that looks like every other product, that doesn't have a story behind it, but instead it acts like a similar to a Marks and Spencer catalog where it's just one product out of many that's in the market today.
Are there any niches that are either in your portfolio companies or ones that you particularly admire out there, just as a concrete example?
Yeah, so one of our portfolio companies is High Beauty. We were looking at the cosmetic space for quite some time. We looked at, I'd say, about 48 companies in total and really dug deep into this space, talking to the entrepreneurs, looking at who they thought their competitors were, what distribution looked like. And what we were finding was many companies were focused so strong on creating a CBD product and pushing it through convenience stores or big box distributors or department stores. And they were having a hard time getting in because many of these stores didn't want to be the first one to have cannabis in their store. CBD, although it's not psychoactive at all, still carries some of the stigma that exists with the plant. And then we met High Beauty. High Beauty was founded by Melissa Josham. She's a 30-year veteran in the cosmetic space. She's launched numerous brands, dozens of brands. Company-wide, she's launched 5 companies. 2 of those companies happen to be Juice Beauty, which is a multi-billion-dollar cosmetics company in the US, and they sell globally, as well as Juice Beauty helped launch Goop Cosmetics, which is Gwyneth Paltrow's line of cosmetics, which is worth over $1 billion as well. And here she had a different strategy. She came to us and said, I know the beauty space. I have a lot of contacts in these stores. And I think the path to go forward is a bit of a Trojan horse strategy where let's create product that has hemp seed oil in it because of all the antioxidant effects of hemp seed oil. And we'll push that onto these stores. And then as these stores get comfortable with our product and our brand name, then we can start putting in CBD products and other cannabinoids, CBG, CBN, CBC, etc. So that Trojan horse strategy has worked very well. She's in Sephora, she's in Urban Outfitters. There's about 25 other retailers that we're going to be announcing in short order of where she's entering into. And that Trojan horse strategy has really worked to her advantage.
But to extend the metaphor a little bit further, when will the Greeks be released? Because I don't think there's any CBD in the products yet.
Always useful that Oscar studied classics at university.
Yeah, exactly. So that'll likely be in Q1 of 2020, just because of the purchase order cycles, and it takes a while to actually put in a purchase order and actually get the product into the store and on the shelf.
Well, I look forward to seeing that in Sephora locally because I know we have those department stores here.
Absolutely. And I guess moving away a little bit from professionally cannabis and veering into socially cannabis. Earlier, you mentioned that sort of you have dabbled in the past before as a user. What products do you like, and how do you like to consume your product when you're off work and have some time to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I characterize myself as a nibbler, and in the sense that I like to try a bit of every single product. So whether that be taking a puff off of a vape, or taking a puff off of a joint, or trying an edible, or trying a beverage, I do bits and pieces of all of them. If I was in a market which was completely legal with all the products that were out in front of me, I'd admittedly say that I'd probably go for the beverage. And I just enjoy the fact that you can spend time with the product without inhaling anything. So you get to take sips and drink it, versus a gummy is very quick. A vape is very quick. A joint is combustion. So the beverage angle really makes sense. It's similar to having a beer and watching watching television at the same time. I think it's going to be a huge piece of the industry once some of the innovative products in the Canadian market really start to open up and bring consumers in that haven't touched the segment yet.
So on that, actually previous episodes of Professionally Cannabis, we've had Duma Wenshu from Province Brands, and we've also had Bill Silver from Canacraft, who of course have their partnership with Heineken with Lagunitas.
Lagunitas, yep.
With regards to cannabis drinks and cannabis beers, so to speak, do you think the winners in this space are likely to be more of the niche organizations like Province Brands, or perhaps the ones that are backed by the large traditional beverage companies?
I think either one can go. I mean, we're not in an industry right now where the large companies can really bully the small companies. One of the examples I like to give is your drugstore nearby where you're looking to buy shampoo. And if you were to create a shampoo brand right now, how hard would it be for you to get onto the shelf of the large drugstore chain that carries shampoo? Very hard, because you have the likes of L'Oreal and some of the larger behemoths in the beauty industry that really stop you from getting onto that shelf. On the cannabis side, that doesn't exist at this point in time. So whether you're a small company going after a niche or you're a large company creating a product, you can go either way on that. When we look at the drinks, I think a lot of pushback that the industry gets is how small of a portion that is within the U.S. market, where you have some mature states such as Colorado, California, Oregon, and Washington. It represents about 5% of the entire industry. But the problem with how the U.S. has panned out is there's no regulatory environment to say that this is the threshold of THC you can have in your drink, versus in Canada, what you're going to see is 5 milligram and 10 milligram THC bottles, hybrids with CBD, and likewise those that are just pure THC, where you're going to buy about 5 or 6 of them, have 3 of them, and get that same type of vibe as if you were to drink 3 beers.
Can we go back to something we touched upon earlier, and it was in my mind? I wanted to talk about when you mentioned, I believe it was India and China. So we don't have too many people talking about Asia on this podcast or in the cannabis industry generally, but we know that China's a huge behemoth when it comes to hemp. India's the largest democracy in the world and has a rich tradition of cannabis uses. How do you see these countries coming online and affecting the global trade?
Yeah, they're coming online every single day. So there's about 6 provinces in China that have legalized hemp production for CBD extraction. Right now, a lot of the hemp strains that they have very low CBD, just because of the fact they're used for more industrial use rather than for consumption of CBD. But those genetics are starting to enter into the market there. China is by far the largest hemp producer in the world and really is the behemoth out there. So once they come online and continue to provide CBD oil, I think it's going to really rock the market in terms of some of the pricing that you're going to see out there. A lot of times when people think of China or India, they think of low-cost labor and production facilities that don't mirror what you're seeing in North America. I'd say that's not true. Talk to some of the top leading startups that are out there. Their aim is to create GMP EU facilities where it really mimics what we're seeing in Canada with the quality of the facility and the quality of the production space. So the product's going to be just as good as what you're finding in North America at a fraction of the price. India is another area that they're really focused in on. Both India and China have had hemp, or medical hemp, they like to call it, in their culture for thousands of years. And India, for example, has a god that is frequently drawn or depicted with a cannabis leaf, holding a cannabis leaf in there as well.
What's the name of that
deity?
That deity.
Oh, I'm going to butcher it, but I can get back to you on that one. I don't want to say something that I'm not supposed to say, especially when we're starting to deal with religion as well. But I'll get back to you on the name of that one. And so they're very keen on it, and they see what's happening in North America. And the beauty of an emerging market is that they're one of the last ones to come in, but they actually move much quicker than an industrial market, which is trying to set the rules for the first time. So you can really see this thing really popping very quickly, and that really just changes the game for cultivation extraction, specifically on the CBD side.
Interesting. And I think we've got time about here for 2 more questions. So I've got one that I wanted to segue in nicely into the conversation, but didn't manage. So it's a bit of a plug, because one of your portfolio companies, TerraSend, just imported from Canada to Germany with a company that I'm part of, Wunder. So I was just wondering if you could talk a bit more about that and your future supply into Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. So TerraSen is quite the unique deal that we had. So initially we invested in TerraSen when it was a Canadian licensed producer. Back in November of 2018, the company came to us and said that they wanted to enter into the US space because of the legality issues around the US. We helped them get in there by restructuring our shares into exchangeable shares, which only turn back into normal shares upon U.S. federal legalization, or the exchanges taking a different stance on how they allow Canadian investment into U.S. companies. TerraSen since then has been burgeoning. They've not only continued to be successful in Canada, but they've launched a product and bought companies in a number of states, including California, Illinois, Massachusetts, and New Jersey. At the same time, TerraSen has become the first and only company that we know of that legally sells product into the US, Canada, and Europe being Germany at this point in time. So as we are and as they are, we're very bullish on the European market, specifically starting off in Germany, and we would continue to supply Germany going into the future. I think over time, some of that starts to dry up because imports and exports aren't going to be predominantly the way some of these new countries come into play. So at the same time, we're always looking to find domestic operations that can help create domestic product for the end user there too.
And for our last question, this is something that I've asked a couple of our guests, but by no means is a staple question of ours. Could you tell us something about you, perhaps something personal that colleagues of yours at Canopy Rivers won't know until they listen to this pod?
I love this question.
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't know if there's anything out there. I'm pretty much an open book. I don't think I can think of anything that they wouldn't know of. I have individuals at Canopy Rivers that I've known for 10, 15, 20 years. So they've seen me as they see me as a very poor student in university all the way up to what I am now. So I don't think there's anything that I can hide or anything that they haven't shown to anybody else.
Well, that's a testament to the energy and workplace environment you've got there that you can be that open.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, well, Narbe, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Where do they go? The smoke rings I blow.
Well, we really hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, we'd love if you could like, share, subscribe, and, pass the pod on to a friend. Oscar, in light of that, what could someone's friend listening to the podcast expect for next week's episode?
Well, I mean, pretty much every week we've got lots of words coming out of people's mouths, but the people whose mouths it is next week are quite spectacular, because we've got, as mentioned in the introduction here, the portfolio company of Canopy Rivers Investment, i.e. we actually see what's the type of thing they invest in, High Beauty. So we've got Melissa Yoakum, the CEO and founder, and she'll be talking to us next week, and she's a lovely lady, so I hope you'll tune in, listeners.
Awesome. And until then, have a great week.
Hello, please take me above, take me with you.